For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. In the heart of the hot desert, where the sun blazes in a relentless display of power, there exists a breathtaking beauty that is both awe-inspiring and dangerous. It is a land of extremes, where the landscape seems to stretch endlessly in every direction, an ocean of golden sands that shimmers like a mirage. The relentless sunsets and sunrises set the horizon ablaze with colors that defy imagination, a testament to the beauty of nature itself. In this seemingly desolate terrain, life persists, tenacious and miraculous. Yet within this beauty, there are perilous obstacles. The desert can be unforgiving, with temperatures that soar to blistering extremes and precious little water to quench one's thirst. The vast expanse can disorient even the most seasoned traveler, and the scorching sands can become an insurmountable obstacle. To survive in the hot desert, one must be as resilient and adaptive as the very life that thrives there. As you tread upon the shifting sands and embrace the arid winds, remember that you are a visitor in this stunning, perilous landscape. The desert teaches us that beauty and danger can coexist, and that our respect for nature is the key to enduring its harshest challenges. Please click the subscribe and like buttons. This is the Outdoor Disasters Desert Disasters Marathon. For Mauro Prosperi, his desert excursion would test the limits of human survival. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi, an Italian police officer and former Olympic pentathlete, sought to test his physical limits. At 39 years old, married with 3 young children, Mauro constantly sought new challenges to push himself. His quest led him to discover the Marathon des Sables, also known as the Marathon of the Sands or the Sahara Marathon, hailed as the most grueling foot race on Earth. This annual ultramarathon spans 6 days, covering a staggering 156 miles, equivalent to completing 6 standard marathons. Set against the harsh backdrop of the Sahara Desert in southern Morocco, it's a relentless, multi-stage adventure through a legendary terrain, one of the planet's harshest environments. Participants in this race must be entirely self-sufficient, carrying all their food and equipment on their backs for the entire week. Each night, communal goat's hair Berber tents are erected for shelter. But beyond that, competitors must bear the burden of their belongings. Water is strictly rationed, and exceeding the allotted amount incurs a time penalty. Prosperi recalled his reaction to learning about the infamously difficult ultramarathon. "I love a challenge, so I started training immediately, running 40 kilometers a day, reducing the amount of water I was drinking to get used to dehydration. I was never home. My wife, Cinzia, thought I was insane. The race is so risky that you have to sign a form to say where you want your body to be sent in case you die." Following rigorous preparation, he boarded a flight to Morocco to commence the race. The 1994 event boasted a mere 134 participants, leaving Prosperi to navigate the majority of the 6-day expedition in solitude. At the race's outset, organizers delivered a briefing, urging runners to seek shelter during sandstorms and advising them to head in the direction of the clouds forming at sunset if they became lost. Yet, as Prosperi recalls, there aren't many shelters in the desert. In the middle of the dunes, it's hard to find a place that will defend you. Mauro Prosperi's journey across the Sahara Desert was progressing smoothly. The 4th day of the Marathon des Sables was the longest single stage, spanning 57 miles or 92 kilometers between campsites. On April 14, 1994, scorching temperatures reached 115 degrees as Prosperi reached the 3rd checkpoint, which was 20 miles or 48 kilometers into the day's grueling trek. Despite the oppressive heat, Prosperi remained in 7th place and maintained an impressive pace. The runners were closing in on the finish line at Zagora, a Berber village nestled in the palm-filled Draa Valley. Giovanni Manzo, a friend from Sicily who was running alongside him, assisted in taping up a worsening blister on Prosperi's foot. Afterward, Prosperi collected his 2-liter water allocation and continued his run. Around 1 p.m., unexpected high winds whipped up a sudden sandstorm, prompting race organizers to halt the event for the day. Other participants sought refuge and eventually reached the fourth checkpoint by nightfall. However, Manzo arrived at the checkpoint, but Prosperi was nowhere to be seen. Manzo couldn't comprehend what might have happened. Prosperi had been ahead of him, and even considering the storm's delay, he should have arrived hours earlier. Nevertheless, the race officials believed that Prosperi couldn't have strayed far. According to the race regulations, in the event of a sandstorm, runners were required to stop and await further instructions. The race officials determined that a comprehensive search would commence the following morning. At first light on Friday, race staff deployed Land Rovers to comb the trail, while a pilot conducted an aerial reconnaissance in an ultralight aircraft. The searchers followed a systematic grid pattern as they scoured the terrain. They recognized the urgency of the situation, as Prosperi had, at most, only 2 liters of water, and by noon, temperatures would soar into the triple digits. Despite their exhaustive efforts, there was no sign of him. Mauro Prosperi had inexplicably vanished. When he began to pass through a section of the race that was dominated by small dunes, the sand around him started to lift and swirl. Small dunes, unlike large ones, he says. The swirling resembled a dance, rhythmic and mesmerizing at first, but the rhythm became insistent, and before he knew what was happening, Prosperi faced a yellow wall. A huge sandstorm engulfed Mauro. I couldn't see anything. The wind blew so violently the sand hurt. Therefore, he pressed onward, attempting to find shelter several times, only to have the relentless sand engulf him each time. He continued to navigate, seeking shelter once more. The tempest persisted for 7 long hours. Once it had finally subsided, there remained nothing discernible to guide his compass. The sandstorm had obliterated every conceivable point of reference. The once familiar landscape was utterly transformed. Prosperi's initial impulse was to run. He had squandered valuable time, and his primary focus remained on completing the race. I hoped to at least get in the medals, he says. Nevertheless, he found it peculiar that he had not encountered a single soul. It was 1994, and the event remained relatively obscure at the time. Prosperi had been running mostly in solitude. However, he couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't crossed paths with the walkers who had departed early from the checkpoint, or come across any race markers. Climbing a dune in search of signs of life, he found himself still utterly alone. As the evening approached, the unrelenting winds showed no sign of abating. He resumed running, but after a few minutes it dawned on him that he had veered off the trail. Determined to regain his bearings, he retreated his steps, scouring the desert for the French flags that marked the route. Eventually, darkness descended upon him, and he concluded that further expending his energy would serve no purpose. My only thought was that through my stupidity, I had forfeited any chance of winning the race. But I knew that I couldn't be more than a few miles from the trail, and that the rescuers would come searching for me at dawn. So I prepared a camp and lit a small fire to create light. I slipped into my sleeping bag and fell asleep under the stars. But Mr. Prosperi saw a silver lining in his ordeal at this point and was in awe at the desert at night. It was immediately fascinating. You have this sky that is white with stars that almost suffocates you, he recalls. On the following morning, Prosperi persisted in his run, maintaining his unwavering belief in the race and his identity as a competitor. Unaware that the race organizers had not initiated a search and realizing that his survival hinged on his own efforts, he remained resolute. At one point, the distant sound of a helicopter reached his ears, sparking hope that it had come to rescue him. The helicopter flew at a low altitude, and he could make out the pilot's white helmet. However, to his dismay, the pilot seemed oblivious to his presence. Carrying flares, which were small and slender, akin to a ballpoint pen, Prosperi decided to take matters into his own hands. He fired a flare into the sky, unfurled the Italian flag from his backpack, and, overcome with desperation, relinquished all self-control. I ran after him. I shouted at him. I called him Paolo, Giovanni, every random name that sprang to mind. But the noise of the engine faded to a hum. Then there was silence, he said. Prosperi gradually transitioned from running to a brisk walk. He found himself engaged in an entirely new challenge, one without a predefined route or a designated finish line. His adversaries in this unexpected contest were slowly revealing themselves. With his supplies mostly consisting of dehydrated food and no water, he faced an arduous test of survival. On the second day of being adrift in the desert, Prosperi's keen eyes spotted a distant object on the horizon. I was convinced it was somebody's home or a holy man's shrine. As he drew nearer, he identified it as a Marabout shrine, a deserted tomb dedicated to a revered Muslim religious leader. While the shrine didn't offer any immediate rescue prospects, it did provide much-needed shade and other resources. Mauro decided to take advantage of this shelter, grateful to finally have a roof over his head. He affixed his Italian flag to the turret of the shrine, and as he settled in, he noticed an unusual sound reminiscent of tiny birds chirping. Upon investigation, he discovered a cluster of tiny bats clinging to the walls. As his food supplies dwindled to nothing, his gnawing hunger drove him to take actions he never believed he would. Prosperi was compelled to scour the surrounding area for anything edible. He resorted to consuming bird eggs, beetles, and even lizards. Matters took a grim turn when he reached a point where he had to resort to killing the bats residing in the shrine, hoping to extract any moisture that cooking their flesh might yield. With determination, he grabbed a handful of bats, squeezing them to death. Employing his small knife, he decapitated them, stirred their insides, and sucked out whatever sustenance they could offer. This grim routine continued with approximately 20 bats. This way, I ate and drank at the same time, he says. Afterward, he carried the bat remains out of the shrine and buried them. This was an act of respect for the shrine and the bats, and perhaps it felt important to impose a ritual of civilization upon what had just occurred. That's how I am, very ordered in things, and it seemed just to me, if I have to kill an animal to live, I will bury the remains, he said. The anti-diarrhea medication he carried in his backpack proved invaluable in preventing further water loss despite his unconventional and limited diet. To quench his thirst, Prosperi resorted to unconventional means such as sucking on damp wipes from his pack, licking morning dew from rocks, and consuming his own urine while it remained relatively clear. In a resourceful move, he also utilized urine for rehydration and cooking his freeze-dried food, as no other water sources were accessible. At the sound of another aircraft, he hurriedly stepped outside to kindle a fire. I made a hole in the sand. I put in all my things, sleeping bag, rucksack. Plastic things make smoke. Unfortunately, as soon as it was lit, another sandstorm hit. I felt so much anger in my body, he recalled. He waited 12 hours inside the Marabout for the storm to pass, and the next day came to a decision. In Italy, if they don't find the body of the presumed dead, the family doesn't receive a payout. Since he was a policeman, his wife would have been entitled to his state pension. Prosperi decided that the sensible course of action was to cut his veins. If he bled to death in the Marabout, his body would be found and the pension paid. Slowly, slowly, I will fall asleep and die, he thought. It sounds like an act of despair, but Prosperi says it was the product of great anger and acuity. He only had a small knife. But Mauro commenced with cutting his veins and waited inside his shelter to die. Prosperi woke the next morning to find that due to extreme dehydration, the blood had clotted almost immediately at his wrists. I thought, it is not my moment. I am not to die here. I will head towards the mountains. From that point onward, his determination to survive surged, and he did everything in his power to ensure his survival. He foraged for rodents and serpents in the area, resorting to consuming large ants, chewing on leaves, and modifying his running shoes by cutting the backs to alleviate the sores on his heels. In a last-ditch effort to reach safety, Prosperi departed from the shrine and commenced a journey toward distant mountains. He embarked during the early morning and late evening hours to evade the scorching daytime heat. Along the way, he strategically left fragments of his gear behind as markers, akin to a trail of breadcrumbs. Although he believed these mountains lay along the Marathon's trail, this route inadvertently took him deeper into the vast Sahara. In the profound and desolate silence of the desert, the only companion he had at times was the faint hiss of the wind. As he traversed arid riverbeds, he resorted to extracting moisture from plant roots. Then, after enduring 8 grueling days in the unforgiving desert, Prosperi stumbled upon a desert oasis. Really, it was only a large puddle, a mirror of water in a wadi. I threw myself upon it and gulped with abandon, but I could hardly swallow. I managed to force a mouthful of it down, and almost immediately I vomited. I couldn't hold anything. I found I had to take tiny sips, one every 10 minutes. After satisfying his thirst, Prosperi replenished his water container and resumed his journey. Over time, he came across some desiccated goat excrement and persisted in his search for additional signs. These dung markings eventually guided him to the presence of human footprints. On the 9th day, he spotted something in the distance. Dromedaries, he thought. As he grew closer, he realized they were goats. He was about 200 meters away when he saw that they were being herded by a girl. He had reached a Berber settlement. I understood then that I was reborn. I'd been in the desert 9.5 days. I felt I'd been inside the belly of the desert like a pregnancy. I was born anew. The Berber families gave him goat's milk, which he vomited up because it was too much after days of starvation and dehydration. Prosperi had trekked all the way to Algeria, crossing through a border region riddled with landmines. Suspected of being a foreign agent, military police blindfolded him and transported him to a base in Tindouf. Later, he was admitted to a hospital, where he spent a week in intensive care. Reports indicated that Prosperi shed 35 pounds during his ordeal, weighing a mere 99 pounds when he was ultimately rescued. Medical professionals noted that his liver had nearly completely failed, and he received 16 liters of intravenous fluids from the hospital staff. Upon reuniting with his family and receiving a warm welcome in Italy, Prosperi's recovery proved challenging. He struggled to consume solid food for several months after his harrowing experience and claimed that it took almost 2 years for him to fully recuperate. Back in his hometown of Rome, he posed for photographs alongside his wife. During this time, a sports journalist who had known him as an Olympian inquired, "So, will you run the marathon again?" To which Prosperi responded, "I always finish my races." True to his word, Prosperi gradually rebuilt his strength over the subsequent 2 years and made a remarkable comeback to compete in the Marathon des Sables in 1997. Remarkably, he went on to complete the race an additional 9 times, with his last participation occurring in 2017. Several adventurers and journalists have cast doubt on the veracity of Prosperi's account, given the seemingly extraordinary nature of the feats he described. Some have suggested that he might have either staged or embellished the ordeal for financial gain and publicity. Patrick Bauer, the founder of the Marathon des Sables, even went as far as declaring to Men's Journal that he believed the story was a fabrication and physically implausible. These assertions prompted Prosperi to contemplate legal action against Bauer, although he eventually decided against it, characterizing the dispute as a personal matter rather than a legal one. Nevertheless, the documented physical trauma Prosperi endured was undeniably excruciating, and it left lasting effects on his body, with a visible scar on his wrist, allegedly from his suicide attempt in the desert. Documentary crews have returned to the Marabout Shrine and uncovered bat skeletons along with abandoned personal items that substantiated his narrative. The tale of Mauro Prosperi's survival might strain credulity for some. Even according to his own recollection, he made decisions that would have ostensibly diminished his prospects of staying alive. Nonetheless, after enduring 9 days in one of the planet's most unforgiving environments, Prosperi managed to eke out a narrow path to safety, an achievement that is undeniably remarkable. Commonly, people associate deserts with death. However, in Mauro Prosperi's case, the opposite held true. He stated, "I say to a lot of people, if you really want to understand life, you have to go to the desert. If you have a life that you can't interpret, you become alone." Everything felt amplified. My love of nature, my love of sport, the will to do, the love of life. For one hiking group, their Grand Canyon excursion would be a catastrophe. In June of 1996, a group of Boy Scouts and their leaders faced a daunting challenge on one of the Grand Canyon's most demanding trails. 5 teenage boys, Mark Coons, Jordan Weingard, David Phillips, Andy Davis, and Joel Keeper, aged 15, embarked on a journey through the Grand Canyon, accompanied by 3 skilled adult guides. Guy Davis, the scout leader, along with brothers Lauren and Earl Pace, who were experienced hikers and navigators. Among the boys, Mark, Jordan, and David had been friends since their early years and had been scouts for several years, with David being the most seasoned hiker among them. Reflecting on their friendship, Mark states, Every one of us boys, we'd grown up in the same neighborhood, gone to school together, and so we were excited to spend some time to bond and to have fun with each other. The Grand Canyon is a massive natural wonder that spans over 270 miles and is up to 18 miles wide, or 435 and 29 kilometers in some areas. It's a place of stunning beauty. However, with its size and rugged terrain, it's no surprise that the park has its fair share of dangers. Every year, people die in the park due to a variety of reasons, including falls, dehydration, and other accidents. Around 900 people have died at the Grand Canyon since the 1800s. The Grand Canyon was officially established as a national park on February 26, 1919. An average of 12 deaths happen at the Grand Canyon every year. There are roughly 5 million visitors to the Grand Canyon. Every year, people die in the park due to a variety of reasons, including falls, dehydration, aircraft crashes, drownings, and many other instances. Environmental factors are the common cause of fatalities at the Grand Canyon, including freezing, flash floods, lighting, and dehydration. Temperatures in the Grand Canyon can reach extreme highs, especially in the summer. Many hikers are not prepared for how hot it can get, up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit at the bottom of the canyon. Each year, around 300 hikers run into trouble in the Grand Canyon, and around 200 of them will need to be airlifted out. Roughly around 10 will die. Most environmental deaths happen from dehydration, which can lead to heat stroke or cardiac arrest. The Grand Canyon is one of the most awe-inspiring landscapes in the world. However, with its beauty comes danger. The Grand Canyon is the most deadly national park in the United States. After a couple of hours of trekking, the boys finally reached the northern rim of the canyon. With a mix of amazement and wonder, the group gazes at the grandeur of the canyon, its towering cliffs leaving a lasting impression. Widening to an incredible 18 miles and plunging nearly a mile deep at certain points, it stands as the largest canyon on Earth. This monumental spectacle transforms it into one of the world's most extreme hiking environments. When you turn that corner and take in the vast panoramic view of cliffs that descend a mile down, there's simply nothing quite like it, Mark expressed. Their next phase involves descending as they venture along the unmarked course of Little Nankoweap Creek bed. This stretch presents a demanding challenge involving steep declines that drop a staggering 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters down to the Colorado River. Once there, they intend to replenish their water supplies before opting for a less strenuous path on their ascent back. The entire expedition is expected to span around 7 days. An hour past the canyon rim, the group finds themselves at the end of the designated trail. From this point onward, they will be navigating uncharted territory all the way to the canyon's base. The path becomes a steep descent across loose gravel and boulders. The trail ended, and then it got very rocky. That's when we saw the difficulty of what the hike was going to be, Jordan recounted. The journey was quickly evolving into a more perilous endeavor. Without a radio and beyond the reach of cell phone signals, any injuries would mean they're entirely on their own. Confronted by the challenging terrain, they make the strategic decision to remove their bulky backpacks and pass them down before carefully maneuvering themselves. Even the seasoned adult guides find themselves grappling with the unforgiving landscape. Guy Davis, one of the guides, suffers a harsh fall along the rocky terrain. Reflecting on the experience, Guy explained, "So at that point, it wasn't just a hike, it was more of a climb. I hit a log straight on, and I just managed to catch it with part of the body you should never hit a log with, and literally knocked the wind out of me considerably." Though the fall was severe, Davis managed to avert disaster. 2 hours into their descent, the exhausted group finally reaches the canyon's floor, having descended over 1,000 feet. At this point, there's no turning back. Throughout the day, the temperature has relentlessly climbed, reaching nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. Unbeknownst to the hikers, an unexpected heat wave has enveloped the canyon. Temperatures are expected to soar to 108 degrees Fahrenheit or 42 degrees Celsius, much hotter than anyone had anticipated, as they had initially expected temperatures in the 90s. This unforgiving heat, combined with the lack of shade in this section of the canyon, leaves them exposed to the scorching sun, gradually draining their energy. As the first day of the hike progresses, the situation takes a downturn. Their water supply is rapidly depleting, with 3/4 already consumed. The only source of water lies downstream in the Colorado River. but reaching it requires descending over 2,000 feet, about 600 meters, with another day and a half of arduous hiking ahead. Given the intense heat, it's clear that their water will run out long before they can access the river. As evening approaches, the group decides to halt and set up camp for the night. "We were just grateful to be off of our feet. We were grateful to have the sun down off of us," Jordan Weingar said. David Phillips takes it upon himself to uplift the morale of his friends. Then, a glimmer catches his eye. The Colorado River comes into view. Despite a sense of optimism about reaching the river the following day, the truth remains that they are still faced with an arduous day's hike away, and their water supply is rapidly dwindling. The fixation on every precious drop of water is becoming all-consuming. That night, I was starting to feel a little shocked and surprised that something I thought would be so fun was starting to turn into something that was so scary and so worrisome to me, and I felt like I had started to lose control of the situation that I was in, Kuhn said. The group collectively agrees that an early start to beat the sun is their best chance at survival. The sun rises the following day, yet the group fails to awaken as planned. By 8 a.m., the unforgiving sun bears down upon them. "I don't remember what time it was, but the sun was on us. It was hot," Jordan recalls. Sweating profusely, they're losing up to 4 pints of water per hour with inadequate means to replenish. Dehydration is setting in rapidly, and the relentless terrain of the Grand Canyon offers no respite. They encounter a rock cliff they must traverse, a feat that drains them of their already waning energy. The water scarcity has become a critical concern. Displaying his experience as a hiker, David selflessly shares the remainder of his water. Still, they're faced with a half-day hike to the river, and their water supply has been depleted. Guy, struggling immensely under the relentless heat, falls behind the rest of the group. He likens the sensation to being trapped in an oven and expresses, "I was physically exhausted." Succumbing to the unbearable conditions, Guy reaches a point where he can go no further. However, by the time the group realizes he's not with them, he's already hundreds of feet farther down the canyon. It's now impossible for Guy to make it to the river. He shouts down to the group, "I can't continue, I need to take a break." Lauren Pace argues that they must wait for Guy, but Jordan holds a different viewpoint. "If we all don't go now, we're all gonna die. I'm not just going to sit here and wait and die," he asserts. Jordan was convincing, and Lauren shouts to Guy they're heading to the river to fetch water and will return. Guy responds, "Take care of the boys," Mark recalls. "I have never heard a tone like that in anyone's voice before. That kind of fear or anything like that ever in my life." The group proceeds with heavy hearts, forced to leave their comrade behind. Continuing their journey, they eventually decide to take a much-needed break. Drawing from his recollections of last year's trek on this trail, Lauren Pace remembers a nearby creek. Without hesitation, David Phillips takes the initiative and decides to make a run for the creek. However, this decision is not without risk, as it places additional strain on David's already dehydrated body. Unfortunately, upon reaching the creek bed, David is met with disappointment. It's bone dry. Deflated, he returns to the group with the grim news. "It was very difficult. We had no idea where water was, how we were going to get there when we get there, or how much longer we would last," Jordan said. The group soldiers on down the canyon, but now the temperature has escalated to a searing 112 degrees Fahrenheit or 45 degrees Celsius. After 6 hours of hiking, Lauren Pace's strength finally gives out. It becomes clear to him that trekking at night would place less strain on their dehydrated bodies. The unanimous sentiment is that staying put would lead to their demise. Consequently, the boys make a decisive choice. They will venture forth and bring back water for their leaders. Up the canyon, Guy Davis's condition continues to deteriorate. His body's fluid levels have dropped to such an extent that his sweat glands have ceased to function. Without the cooling effect of sweat, any physical exertion might trigger an uncontrollable rise in his body temperature. A core temperature of 108 degrees Fahrenheit or 42 degrees Celsius could spell the beginning of brain damage. "I can't believe a time in my life when I wanted to sweat. I knew that if I could sweat, it would cool down my body, and I physically tried to will myself to do that, and I couldn't do it," Mr. Davis said. Guy finds himself in a predicament where attempting to hike out could be fatal. Meanwhile, further down the canyon, the boys are making promising progress, catching sight of the river about a mile away. However, they soon realize they've gone astray, encountering a steep 200-foot or 60-meter sheer cliff leading down to the river, a dead end. The river remains out of reach, and their water supply has been exhausted. Their leader has collapsed, leaving the group's fate resting on the shoulders of three 15-year-old boys. Hitting this insurmountable cliff feels like the last straw, and with the group not expected back for another 6 days, the prospect of a timely search party seems grim. The boys manage to find a small crevice in the cliffs, seeking shelter from the relentless sun. They're exhausted, and hope is dwindling. In my mind, I knew we were going to die. You're weak. Your body hurts and aches. You have headaches. I just remember not knowing if I'd ever get up from that position. I remembered that could be the last place I'd be. Under that rock, Weingar said. As they lay there, seemingly awaiting their fate, Mark Coons slips into unconsciousness. Stirring from a dream of being in a coffin, Mark is jolted into action by the realization that he doesn't want to die. Without a clear plan, Mark decides that staying put isn't an option. Summoning his determination, he resolves to descend the imposing 60-meter rock face. He tosses his backpack down. At this point, in their weakened state, climbing down the cliff would be a monumental effort. Lacking ropes, harnesses, or climbing expertise, they are attempting a free solo climb without prior experience. Yet their options have boiled down to this daring climb or certain death. Mark, Jordan, and David commenced their descent, with Mark leading the way. I thought we were going to die anyways. To me, death was going to happen, and so it seemed like anything would be better, even if it was a ridiculous plan, Jordan said. Mark reassures his companions that the climb is doable, and astonishingly, all three manage to navigate the ascent. However, the exertion takes a toll on David, showing signs of heat stroke. Meanwhile, up the canyon, Guy Davis is grappling with his own struggles. Recognizing that any hope of rescue must come from above, Guy summons the last of his remaining energy to lay out his mylar blanket. This seemingly simple task proves incredibly arduous given his condition, leaving him utterly depleted. Guy is now entirely alone and vulnerable. Just when it seems the situation couldn't become more dire, a rattlesnake slithers into Davis's vicinity, leaving him powerless to evade the potentially lethal encounter. The western diamondback rattlesnake, known for its aggressiveness and venom potency that can lead to death within 6 hours, engages in a tense standoff with Guy. Their eyes lock, and after an agonizing hour, the snake eventually moves on, bringing Davis a palpable sense of relief. Descending the canyon, the boys' ears catch the distant sound of the river, fueling their hope that it's within reach. However, with each turn they take, the river remains elusive and their struggle intensifies. David Phillips' condition has taken a severe turn for the worse. Trembling and afflicted by blurred vision, he suddenly finds himself leaning against a tree before collapsing. His eyes roll back, signaling a full-blown heat stroke. Mark remains by his side as Jordan rushes towards the river. Eventually reaching its banks, Jordan leaps in, although his relief is fleeting as he quickly returns to David's side, urgently attempting to cool him down. Despite their efforts, David shows no response, and their need for water becomes even more critical. This prompts Mark to make his way down to the river. Like Jordan, he tentatively immerses himself in the refreshing waters of the Colorado River, a much-needed source of replenishment. While filling up bottles, Mark spots a group of rafters downstream, an incredible stroke of luck. Had the timing been just a minute earlier or later, the rafters might have passed by without discovering the boys. Coincidentally, the rafting party consists of doctors and paramedics, who swiftly establish a camp where David lies and works tirelessly through the night. Eventually, a doctor delivers the devastating news. It was dark, so I can't really put a time on it, but somewhere around 10 that night, the one that said he was a doctor came over and said, "I'm sorry to inform you, but your friend has just passed away," Mark recounted. The loss was overwhelming for the boys. By the following morning, when rescue helicopters arrive, the remaining teenagers have made their way down the river. Thanks to his emergency blanket, Guy Davis is swiftly located, while Lauren Pace is eventually discovered wandering alone in the canyon. The sorrow over David Phillips' passing hangs heavy among them. Today, Mark Coons has become a dentist, and Jordan Weingar serves as a police officer. Both carry with them the indelible memory of that fateful day in the Grand Canyon. They maintain a close connection with David's family. Reflecting on the events of June 1996, Mark shared, "It's surreal, and it shifts your perspective on death when someone you've known, spent time with just hours before, full of life, happiness and vitality suddenly vanishes. For Émile Loray, being stranded in the Sahara would be a legendary story of survival. In 1993, French engineer Émile Loray embarked on a journey through the Moroccan Sahara Desert in his Citroën 2CV, a car that was well known for its durability. He was no stranger to the desert outside Morocco. He's done many African excursions and knew the area well. In March of 1993, 43-year-old Émile set off from Tantan on the Moroccan coast to Zagora. He left Tantan with the required reserves of fuel and provisions as well as tools to keep his old 2CV on the road. At this time, the Western Sahara War, an armed struggle between the Sahrawi indigenous Polisario Front and Morocco, agreed to a ceasefire. With the Polisario ceasefire just 18 months old and frequently being broken at the small town of Tilimsaoun, the Moroccan army stopped Loray from continuing south towards Moussaid, the former Polisario front line. He was asked to take a soldier back to town. He did not want to get involved and wanted to continue his journey. Émile claims an insurance problem that does not allow him to take passengers, arguing that his 2CV is already very loaded and cumbersome. He knows full well that in Africa, it's looked down upon to not give soldiers rides, especially in the desert. He claims naivety and misunderstanding, playing the role of a tourist not familiar with local customs. Émile then is turned back towards Tantan under the disgruntled and disapproving look of the soldiers. He's afraid he will be followed, and he wanted to remain out of sight of soldiers. So he puts the pedal to the metal on his 2CV. His plan is to bypass the area and resume his original direction. After a few miles, he sees a track through the desert and believes this is a good area to deviate from the road and bypass the checkpoint. So Loray takes his Citroën 2CV and traverses on an uneven, rocky desert path. After some vigorous bouncing, his car strikes a big rock and comes to a stop. He gets out and takes a look at his car, and it was bad, a broken wheel arm. The car was totally damaged and immobile, and he was stranded in the Sahara Desert. Émile was about 25 miles from Tantan, which is possible to reach on foot, but he runs the risk of theft in the extremes of the desert. Émile Loray decided that he would not risk walking to the nearest town. "I could not have gone back on foot, it was too far," he said. Émile had many valuables and important equipment he did not want to leave alone. In the desert, nothing is permanently lost, especially for the ones who know where to look. He could not communicate with anyone as mobile phones did not exist then. He realized that he was in a precarious situation as he was many miles away from the nearest town. He also had little food and water. "I put myself in what one calls survival mode. I decided I will eat and drink less and monitor my supplies of water and food to make them last as long as possible," he says. Émile organizes his encampment around the broken 2CV and reflects on the situation. He had enough food and water to last for a few days, so makes a decision. From his wreck, he will build a two-wheeled machine. One by one, he carefully considered all the technical obstacles that this entails, and being a master of African bush mechanics, he believes he has all the tools and the elements to succeed in the task. He began to dismantle the 2CV, first removing the body, which he will use as a shelter against the cool nights and sandstorms. Having no long-sleeved shirts against the burning sun, he makes sleeves from a pair of socks. With what remains of the car, Émile Loray will try to build the motorcycle. The first night, he mentally reviewed all the stages and difficulties involved in this rather crazy project. When he woke up the next morning, it was time to go to work. He shortened the car's chassis and reattached the axle to two of the wheels. Repurposing the wheel arm, attaching it to part of the chassis, and slapping the engine in the middle. Loray even added a seat to his manual transmission Desert Beast using the bummer. For thick pieces, he'll do it as Émile calls it, the African way. The piece of metal is folded to 90 degrees to form an edge. At a fixed point, this edge is weakened by a hacksaw or round file. The piece must be placed flat to perforate the file point with a hammer or a needle. He would bend them, drilling holes with metal bits until he could create guides for the screws he salvaged. It seems unthinkable to assemble this machine in the middle of the desert, without the help of a drill and a welding station. But that didn't stop Loray. He was going to take on this audacious undertaking. The rest is only a matter of time, dependent on how long his provisions will last. Emil calculates it will take 3 days to build the bike. In reality, it will take longer. There was a great deal of uncertainty to carry out this project. The possibility of failure remained high. Stranded in the Sahara Desert, the likelihood of death was high. And if he did run into one of these desert thieves, what would they do to him? But Emil continues to work on, bending, sawing, screwing, sweating. But at last, his prototype was finished. The 2CV motorcycle was obviously not conceived for the sake of comfort or aesthetics. The exhaust is loose, so the nose and the ears are affected greatly by the engine's gases. The bike does not have a brake, nor does it have footrests, but he needed to brake and keep the bike balanced with his feet since the machine had poor stability. The first test ride nearly killed him, as the bike wanted to wheel stand all the time. Some tweaking managed to calm the thing down and limited the speed to around 20 kilometers per hour. Better than nothing. He was lucky he wasn't seriously injured. So back to the desert lab, he continued to work. The arrangement of the clutch and accelerator controls was particularly tedious, but was necessary to dismantle, adjust, and reassemble the parts for optimum operation, day after day, fall after fall. Emil continued to work on his machine, prolonging his stay in the desert, more than the 3 days expected. As Emil Larrey wiped the sweat from his brow in the Sahara heat, he knew the clock was running out. The last of it is water reflected light in his eyes, a reminder that he'd better have success soon or someone would come upon a strange sight, finding his corpse next to this desert oasis of madness. On the 12th day, Larrey spent the day adjusting and testing, still hammering and bending away to get this machine right. The pressure was on. He had to get it right or he risked dying of dehydration, a terrible way to die. So gets on the machine. He starts it up. He's lost count of how many test rides and failures he's had so far, and off he goes. He hasn't fallen. He has control. He has balance. "It works!" Emil yells. You can only imagine Emil grinning ear to ear as his creation is functional, riding in the middle of the desert with this Frankenstein creation he calls the desert camel. He quickly gathers his things. He also feels compelled to clean the bivouac site of a mad scientist. He barely had enough water left to make it back to civilization, but he'd done it. The bike was operational, and he was off. After a day of riding, Emil was picked up by the Moroccan police force, who took him to the nearest village. They handed him a big fine and impounded the desert camel because the registration documents for his car no longer corresponded to what he was driving. His car, bike monstrosity. He had to leave the camel for now. A month later, Emil made the 2,000-mile journey between Rennes and Tantan with another 2CV to pick up his motorcycle, now dismantled in 3 parts. Although his story appeared in brief on French television in the 1990s, Mr. Larrey did not publicize his exploits, and they only recently emerged again after appearing on a motoring website. Mr. Larrey, now much older, has kept the motorbike as a memento of his incredible escape from the Moroccan desert. The Desert Camel has enjoyed the honors of the press and participated in a few events. The camel still lives. For one German family, Death Valley would be their final resting place. On the morning of October 21st, 1996, a Death Valley ranger was scouring the desert during routine aerial surveillance looking for drug labs in the backcountry. Around 11 a.m., he saw something unexpected. A vehicle in the wash of Anvil Canyon, approximately 2 miles downstream from Willow Spring, the head of Anvil Canyon. This was extremely odd for several reasons. There wasn't a real or legal road down Anvil Canyon any longer. The second piece of oddness was that the vehicle appeared to be a standard passenger van. While Anvil Canyon could still be traversed by a competent 4-wheel drive vehicle, a 2-wheeled passenger van was totally inappropriate and couldn't be expected to get far in that canyon. It was a green, 1996 Plymouth Voyager van with California license plates. It was covered with considerable dust, as if it had been out there for some time. The van was clearly stuck in the wash, sunk up to its axles in the sand, with its 2 rear tires flattened and its left front tire also flat. Tracks left in the sand by the van suggested it had been driven at least 200 feet with flat rear tires. The van was locked, with no sign of the owner. The ranger noted the license number and reported it back to the Death Valley headquarters. A quick check on the license plate with the California Highway Patrol revealed the vehicle was reported stolen by the Los Angeles Police Department on September 10, 1996. This was the beginning of an intense investigation and search for the owner of the vehicle. The vehicle, owned by Dollar Rent-A-Car, had been rented to a group of 4 German tourists in Los Angeles on July 8, 1996. The vehicle had been due back to the rental agency in Los Angeles on July 26, but had never been returned. Heike Weber had reported her ex-husband Egbert Rimkus, 34, and their son Georg, 11, missing. They traveled with Egbert's girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, 28, and her 4-year-old son Max. They rented the minivan in Cornelia's name on July 8, 1996, after flying from Germany to Seattle and then to LA. They missed their flight from San Francisco back to Germany on July 26th. Investigators now knew who to look for. After searching the minivan and finding numerous items to investigate their whereabouts before, and possibly after they abandoned the minivan, they explored San Clemente, where the family had stayed, and the California coast, where they were planning to be. At some point, Egbert had $1,500 wired from his bank. Then they went to Las Vegas, where they stayed at the Treasure Island Resort. At this point, Egbert reached out to his ex-wife to borrow money, but she did not loan him any. On July 22nd, they continued on to Death Valley. Receipt records at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center show that on July 22nd, 2 copies of Death Valley National Monument Museum in German were sold. Egbert, Cornelia, Georg, and Max were never seen again. The recorded temperatures for the known dates of their visit to Death Valley were 124 degrees. The temps in Anvil Canyon were cooler due to the higher elevation, but the area is remote and all of Death Valley is unforgiving, so the temperature difference likely didn't matter much. They were stranded with a limited amount of supplies in a foreign country, in an environment that not many, if any, would go out into willingly. A search and discovery began for the bodies. 2 miles east of the car in Anvil Canyon, 1 Bud Ice beer bottle was found in the sand next to a bush with what looked to be a mark where somebody had sat. Day 2 of the search, October 24th, brought additional teams and expanded the search area. Areas searched this day included more of Anvil Canyon, portions of Warm Spring Road and Butte Valley, Mengel Pass, the area adjacent to Warm Spring Road between the canyon mouth and West Side Road, and from the van location easterly to the head of Anvil Canyon at Willow Spring. There were also 2 helicopters involved this day, both for searching and shuttling supplies and searchers. There were 2 more days of searching the surrounding area before the search was eventually called off, and the family was presumed dead. Some German canteens had also been found 3 miles southeast of the van, but the exact location couldn't be determined, as the person who retrieved them never returned calls when contacted. This was truly a massive search performed by very competent search teams. There were over 45 searchers in the field, and 2 helicopters in the air at any given time, and 8 horses on the ground. It was estimated by a Death Valley spokesperson that 250 people were involved in the search at one time or another. Time went on, and formal searches ceased. The mystery of the Death Valley Germans became a phenomenon on the internet, and numerous theories were formulated by independent sleuths. The most popular theory was the Germans staged the incident to disappear and start new lives. This was given some momentum by Egbert's ex-wife, saying there were custody issues with their son. Also, co-workers of Egbert stated he talked about moving to Costa Rica, but staging a disappearance in a dangerous and remote environment like Death Valley in summer seemed highly unlikely. Further, Cornelia had a thriving business back in Germany and had no reason to disappear. Many believed there was a criminal element behind their disappearance, but Egbert's bank cards were left in the van and not taken. No activity was ever recorded on Cornelia's cards. The van, being the most valuable item, was abandoned and left locked, and no other vehicle tracks were seen, which rules out criminality. Online sleuths suspected they were German spies looking to infiltrate the China Lake Naval Weapons Center nearby. Even alien abductions were on the table. However, in 2009, search and rescuer Tom Mahood became intrigued by the story of the Death Valley Germans before joining the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit in February of that year. To receive more training, Mahood took a course in man tracking in September 2009, which involves learning to follow the tracks of people rather than animals. The course would be headed by China Lake Mountain Rescue Group in the Death Valley area, which was involved in the search back in 1996. This was a great opportunity to ask more about the Germans' case. The missing Germans struck me as a case that simply had to have more to it, Tom stated. After pulling some strings and getting some detailed evidence and information from the investigation, he possessed all the information he was likely to obtain for the case. It was now time to head into the field and investigate. On Tuesday, October 27, 2009, Tom Mahood started his field investigation. The first field recon was a solo trek. With the GPS coordinates, he made it to the van's location. He marked off the approximate outline of the van with flags and took photos to match those in the Death Valley investigators' report. As I climbed up on the bank of the wash to the south to take overall pictures, it suddenly struck me that Egbert probably did the same thing and was at the same spot on the bank, to get an overview of where they were. It was a very eerie feeling, Tom stated. He hiked around the area, coming upon the bush where the beer bottle was found. Covering a total of just over 12 miles that day, he explored numerous landmarks and tried to put himself in the mind of Egbert and what led him astray. 2 days after his trek, as Tom was looking over a map of Death Valley at home, Mahood had an epiphany. I suddenly saw a way the Germans could have ended up in Anvil Canyon through a series of reasonable, honest mistakes, and why they might have set out for the south. I was also acutely aware that I might have done exactly the same thing were I in their situation. Is this in fact what happened? No one can know for sure, but it offered an explanation for their apparent actions and fits the known facts of the incident very well, he stated. Tom Mahood concocted a theory of what happened to the Germans that led to their death. This theory would lead Tom to search in areas that were ignored in 1996. Their rental van was due back in Los Angeles on July 26th, and they were returning to Germany the next day, the 27th. They may have been low on funds. The official reports indicate Egbert had some trouble getting money transferred to him earlier in the trip. He later requested additional money from his ex-wife in Las Vegas. This didn't occur, so money was perhaps an issue as they planned to travel to Yosemite via Death Valley. Arriving at the Death Valley Visitor Center on the 22nd, they may have been looking for a route to see interesting sights in the valley, with the ultimate goal being Yosemite. The Germans knew that with valley floor temperatures reaching 124 degrees Fahrenheit, they couldn't camp in the main valley, and with low funds, renting a room at Furnace Creek was out of the question. Hot weather camping could be tolerable in higher elevations, which would explain their choice of traveling on West Side Road. The maps they had available to them showed a route to the west, via Butte Valley and Mengle Pass, then north to the ghost town of Ballarat, and on to Yosemite. They weren't familiar with how rugged Death Valley roads in the backcountry could be, but understandable for them to believe they could do it. The Germans camped at Hanaupa Canyon on the night of July 22nd. They would have successfully navigated a considerable number of dirt road miles on West Side Road, which may have lowered their guard as to potential hazards. They also made it up Hanaupa Canyon in a two-wheeled minivan, which may have further bolstered their confidence in backcountry traveling. And they had 3 nights left before they had to be in Los Angeles. Just enough time for a quick trip through Yosemite, which they may have expected to reach by the next night, the 23rd. So early on the morning of the 23rd, to beat the heat, Egbert, Cornelia, and the kids left Hanaupa Canyon and continued south to Warm Spring Road and turned west. They would have experienced a very fine dirt road at that point, validating their overall plan. Reaching the Warm Spring camp, they hear hoping for some signs of life and get an idea of the road conditions further down the road. The camp was deserted, so they signed the register, indicating they were going over Mengle Pass. Continuing westerly toward Butte Valley, they encountered their first sections of truly questionable two-wheel drive road. By now, they would have invested considerable time getting in there. Thus, the pressure to continue westward would have mounted, so they chose to risk driving on the road. Coming upon the geologist cabin, it was deserted as well. They decided to take the USA flag from the cabin and continued on. As they approached Mengle Pass, it was obvious this was a 4-wheel overland vehicle road, and their Plymouth minivan was incapable of traversing this track. They had to turn back. A dilemma now loomed. At this point, it was probably late afternoon. Going back through Warm Spring Road, it would have taken at least 2 hours for them to return to the paved road in the valley, and it was going in the opposite direction where they needed to be. They wanted to see Yosemite and be in LA on the 26th. The treacherous road between Butte Valley and Warm Springs they just traversed was likely a battle they didn't want to revisit. Egbert likely saw another route on the map, which would be a shorter route back down to the valley in the form of a road down Anvil Canyon. This will show to be a deadly mistake. So the Germans returned to the intersection at the geologist's cabin and turned right onto Anvil Canyon Road. The turn onto Anvil Canyon Road was likely premeditated and reasoned. The first couple miles down the road is drivable, along with sections inside the canyon, but the roads would turn harsh quickly. Egbert, seeing the road was more treacherous and the possibility of getting stuck was high, plus they need to get back to the main road, was driving faster than the minivan could handle with its low clearance. The rear tires explode, but he's still moving. Stopping at this point would guarantee being stuck in the backcountry. Egbert misjudged a fork in the road and went right when the road in fact veered left, heading toward the sandy wash. He tries to cut back left to join the main road, but the minivan comes to a halt, stuck in the gravelly sand of the wash inside Anvil Canyon. With temperatures in the hundreds and miles from civilization, they were in dire straits. In the middle of Death Valley backcountry, with a busted rental, limited rations, with kids in tow, and only days away from their flight back to Germany. Evidence suggests Egbert, seeing that they were in serious trouble, decided to make a trek to see if there were any signs of life down Anvil Canyon Road. With the sun bearing down on him, Egbert drinks a beer under a bush, providing shade during the very late afternoon. From this location it is possible to see easterly down the canyon to the mouth of Anvil Canyon, and all the way to the east side of the main valley where the paved Badwater Road 16 miles away. This is when Egbert likely comes up with an extraction plan. Stranded in an area they haven't seen another human being for days, and were in need of assistance to extract their rental, the Germans were growing concerned. They had to make the flight in a few days. In examining their maps, Ballarat was many miles away, and with unknown services. Furnace Creek, the center of Death Valley, was way too far on foot. Heading down to Badwater Road on the valley's east side was in the area of the valley's legendary lethal heat. But there was another possibility. The Germans had likely seen many military installations in Europe, and they had certain commonalities. They all had fences that were regularly patrolled by armed personnel. The likelihood of patrols at the edge of a military installation would have seemed quite high. Egbert, looking at the maps available to him, would have seen the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center to be only about 9 miles to the south of them. Looking to the south shows what appears to be a simple traversable route south, up over a low pass in the mountains. Egbert believes this is a great plan, getting to the safety of a military installation and not descending down below sea level. The depth and shape of Death Valley influence its extreme heat. The valley is a long, narrow basin, 282 feet below sea level, yet is walled by high, steep mountain ranges. The clear, dry air and sparse plant cover allow sunlight to heat the desert surface. Heat radiates back from the rocks and soil, then becomes trapped in the valley's depths. Heated air rises, cools before it can rise over the valley's mountain walls, and is recycled back down to the valley floor. These pockets of descending air are only slightly cooler than the surrounding hot air. As they descend, they are compressed and heated even more by the low elevation air pressure. These moving masses of superheated air blow through the valley, creating extremely high temperatures. What Egbert didn't know was U.S. desert military installations are seldom manned by military personnel. Security is provided more by vastness rather than fencing. After formulating his plan at the bush, Egbert headed back to the van. The group then probably spent the night at the van, and then early the next morning locked the vehicle and headed east down Anvil Canyon to a little past the Bottle Bush, then turned south toward the China Lake Naval Base boundary in the hope of rescue. The right option was probably heading back to the geologist's cabin for water and shelter. But the Germans had to get back for their flight, and there was no guarantee of receiving help in time. So heading to the military installation seemed to be the best option for the quickest extraction. So Egbert Rimkus, his son Georg, Cornelia Meyer, and 4-year-old Max set off down the canyon road to their impending doom. With this plausible theory in mind, on November 11, 2009, Tom Mahood and friend and colleague Les Walker went searching for the German family and set out to Death Valley that morning. From the Bottle Bush, they headed south in the direction Tom believed the German may have trekked. With no luck the first night, they camped and spent a cold night in Death Valley. Early that morning, they woke up and decided to split up to cover more area, keeping in contact via radio. Sometime later, Les contacts Tom to inform him he found a wine bottle. Then he radios again to inform him he found a piece of a daily planner in German. As he arrives at the scene, Mahood clearly sees skeletal remains. Les finds Cornelia's wallet. Upon further search, they found more bits of a daily planner in German as well as business cards from places that they had visited on their trip to the States. They found one empty bottle that, when formally collected and investigated, was determined to match the other bottles investigators found back at the minivan in 1996. They knew this was enough to give to authorities, so they rushed back to the truck and floored it back to Furnace Creek before it closed at 5 p.m. They reached their destination and informed authorities of what they found. They brought Cornelia's wallet with them as confirmation. They were put on the phone with an Inyo County Sheriff's Office investigator to answer some questions, and were requested to stay overnight to aid investigators in the morning. The next day, they were directed to an airfield where Inyo search and rescue personnel, officers from the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, an FBI agent, and a Seahawk helicopter were awaiting them. They flew to the site where authorities collected the evidence at the site. Later on, after DNA analysis of the skeletal remains, they were able to ID Egbert and Cornelia. On December 6, 2010, Inyo County sheriffs found remains that seemed to be of a child or children, as well as some small shoes, but not enough DNA to positively connect them with the children. The case was essentially closed, and the fate of the Germans was put to rest. The following is a hypothetical theory on how the Germans' last days may have gone. Making the trek south of the van toward the military installation. What was thought to be a somewhat easy hike is not the case. They're higher in elevation, but it is still a scorching 100 degrees with no shade from the Death Valley sun. Kids suffer from the heat faster than adults, so it's really taking its toll on Georg and Max. They can't go on any longer. Egbert, seeing his family suffering, sees a small butte up ahead. They walk towards the butte and settle down. The small overhang provides some relief from the beating sun, but it's still hot and they had nothing but alcohol, a few snacks, and a couple of bottles of water. Egbert tells Cornelia he's going to the military installation and for them to stay put, and he'll be back with help. Although he's exhausted, the rest and shade help some. He drinks a beer and continues the next 4 miles to the base. Egbert arrives at the military installation and sees no one is around. Devastated, Egbert turns around and arrives back at the butte to see his family in despair, but he's way too exhausted to go anywhere and flops down next to them. So the family settles down for the night, hoping that rescue may come. But they're in a remote part of the valley where traffic is rare. Egbert knew unless a plane flies over or maybe an off-roader comes by, the chances of rescue were slim. No one knew where they were. Max was not in good shape. While deserts are notorious for cold nights, a summer in Death Valley sees only a drop into the mid-80s during the night. As the sun arises comes the extreme heat as well. Egbert and Cornelia give all the rations and the rest of the water to the children, but it's not enough. They now only have wine to drink. The children may not make it through the day if a rescue does not come. The butte only provides some relief for part of the day, so the sun is bearing down on the family. The first stage of hyperthermia begins. Sweating can no longer keep their bodies at a manageable temperature, then heat cramps. When sweating ceases, bodies start to swell and muscles start to seize. For Max and Georg, the process to die of heat stroke is snowballing more quickly than for Egbert and Cornelia. Then heat exhaustion. You start to feel lethargic and cycle in and out of alertness. And last comes heat stroke. Cycling in and out of consciousness, there's often an altered mental state. At this point, some people are no longer aware they're in pain or discomfort. The cells in vital organs start to swell, they burst and die. Infants and children up to 4 years of age, people 65 years of age and older are the most vulnerable to heat-related illness. This process happens quickly, sometimes within 2 or 3 hours. The first one to perish is Max. Cornelia is devastated and Egbert is rife with guilt and shame. It was his idea to take this route, and now Cornelia's son is dead. With any energy they had, they dug out a small grave, not too deep because they were exhausted, and buried Max. Egbert is now worried about Georg. He's 11, so hasn't succumbed yet, but he's not looking good. The night comes and Egbert and Cornelia do everything to comfort him, but they know this may be their final hours. The three make it through the night, but the heat does not let up. All of them are suffering, looking for anywhere to lie down away from the sun. Georg has now passed on. Egbert, with the last of his energy, grabs his son and apologizes. Egbert has now lost all will to live. Since he used a lot of energy to go to the military installation and gave most of the rations to the others, he's now on his last legs. Hours later, Egbert passes on as well. Now Cornelia is left alone. She's laying down and doesn't have the energy to react to Egbert's passing. She knew she was next. It was still scorching, alone, with 3 dead bodies around her. With the unrelenting heat bearing down on her, Cornelia takes her last breath. With the evidence of the skeletal remains, along with the Mahud theory and no signs of foul play, it's the logical conclusion the Germans died of heat stroke under the small bluff. Likely they suffered for a few days after being stranded in Death Valley. For Claire Nelson, her Joshua Tree adventure would take a turn for the worse. Nelson, who hails from New Zealand, made a significant move to London in her early 20s, where she embarked on a career as a freelance writer. Eventually, she transitioned into the role of an editor at a food and travel magazine. After spending 13 years in the bustling city, she needed a change. Her plan was to travel for a couple of years and spend time outdoors figuring out how she really wanted to live, who she wanted to be. All my anxieties and fears in my life really just came down to my role in the lives of other people. Where I belonged and where I fit in and what my value as a person is, how I'm perceived and understood. And there's something about being out in the wilderness on your own. It's like all of that is stripped away. And that's really what I wanted to go to. I wanted to lean into that and feel safe out in this place on my own because it was so far from the things that were making me stressed and anxious, she expressed. Claire opted to relocate to Canada, seeking a new beginning. Shortly after she arrived in Canada, Claire received a message from an old roommate who had since relocated to Joshua Tree. She and her partner would be out of town for a few weeks and wondered if Claire wanted to take care of their cats. She jumped at the opportunity with the motivation to discover peace and purpose amid the natural beauty of the outdoors. So, in May 2018, she embarked on her journey to one of the harshest national parks in America. After house-sitting for just over a week, she devised a strategy to optimize her hiking opportunities. She meticulously crafted a calendar outlining which days she'd allocate for hiking adventures. Her first choice for a hike within the park was the renowned Lost Palms Oasis Trail. This trail, with a moderate rating, spans 7 miles round trip, leading to a cluster of magnificent California palms, and stood as one of the park's more popular routes. Claire, aiming for a less crowded experience, selected a Tuesday for her excursion. It unfolded as a scorching, late May day of sheer beauty. Initially planning to commence her hike early to escape the intense heat, Claire encountered a small hiccup when she lost her way en route to the trailhead, ultimately necessitating a visit to the ranger station at the visitor center for much-needed directions. I asked if there was anything I should be aware of on the trail, and they warned me there was a little bit of a scramble at some point. I said, "That's fine, I'm comfortable with scrambling, sounds great," she said. She ensured she had an ample supply of water to withstand the day's scorching heat, carrying 5 liters with her. When she finally embarked on the trail, it was around 9 a.m., a slightly later start than she had originally intended. It's such a beautiful trail. You come up onto this really high ridge at one point, and you're looking down so that the valley just rolls on each side, and it just took my breath away, Nelson said. The enchanting beauty and tranquil atmosphere of Joshua Tree filled Claire with joy. With no one else in sight, it felt as if she had the entire park to herself. This solitude was precisely what Claire had sought when she made the decision to visit Joshua Tree. However, the tranquility would transform into a nightmarish ordeal as she embarked on her day hike, and everything would take a disastrous turn. Claire Nelson discovered herself meandering through a desert wash, savoring the tranquility that came with being alone with her thoughts in this breathtaking landscape. Eventually, she reached a vast boulder deck, a formation consisting of a substantial pile of massive rocks, she recalls. And I thought, oh, that's strange. The trail just literally stops, and there's these boulders. And I thought, well, they did mention there was some scrambling, so I guess this is where it starts. Miss Nelson ascended the initial section of boulders with relative ease. The vista from the opposite side was untamed and expansive, presenting an unending expanse of rocky terrain, cliffs, and boulders. Overwhelmed by the view, she decided to sit down for a moment and absorb it all. To reach the opposite side, she had to navigate her way across the rocky terrain and descend into the valley. She carefully assessed her footing on the boulder, ensuring her balance as she prepared to cross the stack and make her way downward. Placing her right foot down, she securely nestled her feet into a foothold. I thought I would just press my weight, swing my leg over, and be done, but as soon as I started to put more weight on my foot, it just slipped and I started to slide, and everything went in slow motion. I could remember every movement in my body. Claire clutched a hiking stick in one hand and desperately reached for anything to grab onto with her other hand. But there was nothing to hold on to. Suddenly, Claire found herself plummeting approximately 25 feet from the boulder, crashing onto the ground on her back amidst a cluster of boulders. The impact left her unable to move her legs, but to her immense relief, her toes retained their mobility, indicating she wasn't paralyzed. Claire had sustained a shattered pelvis from the fall, rendering her immobile from the waist down, with only her arms remaining under her control. She retrieved her phone from her backpack and attempted to dial 911, yet she discovered that there was no cellular service available. It was at this point the horror of the situation hit me. I can't move and I can't tell anyone what happened. Then I remembered. I haven't told anyone where I was going, she said. The situation was dire for Claire Nelson, and survival was slim to none. Even as she realized how bad of a situation she was in, Claire was mad at herself. She recognized she should have known better than to venture on a solo hike without informing someone of her whereabouts. Ironically, she had previously passed judgment on individuals who had made similar choices, and now she found herself in that very position. Claire Nelson contemplated her situation, realizing that she couldn't reach anybody, having failed to inform anyone about her hike. She concluded that her best option was to wait for another hiker to pass by. It was late morning, around 11 a.m., and she held hope that someone else would explore the trail that day. As she diligently searched her phone for a way to alert others, she stumbled upon the SOS function on her iPhone, thinking it might save her. However, she soon realized that this feature required a phone signal to work. Frustrated and anxious, she continued exploring her phone's capabilities. Claire had downloaded all her Google Maps in advance, anticipating the lack of signal in the area. When she opened the maps, she noticed the small blue GPS dot indicating her location. Upon closer examination, she realized that she had strayed at least a mile from the trail. This discovery shattered her last hope of someone finding her. At that moment, the full weight of her horrifying situation sunk in.
This is not where I expected to end up. Shattered pelvis. In the desert.
She was becoming aware of the searing heat that surrounded her. She lay flat on her back within the towering boulders, exposed to the relentless sun. During that season, temperatures in the park soared to as high as 90 to 95 degrees at the peak of the day. Claire realized the urgency of shielding herself from the sun to avoid the risk of sunburn.
It is fucking hot. I don't know what temperature it is out here. It must be in the 40s. And I can't get to any shade. I just tried, out of a sheer moment of fuck the pain again, and I tried to roll myself over into that little shady alcove.
She was only wearing hiking shorts and a t-shirt, appropriate attire for a desert hike. Being stranded, unable to move in the desert, the Joshua Tree Desert, with the sun bearing down on her skin, and the desert nights where temperatures plummet, her clothes would not be close to enough protection. I had my friend's hiking stick that I borrowed from the house. I used the hiking stick to apply sunscreen to my legs because I couldn't reach them. And then I held my hat up with one arm over my face between me and the sun. And that was just kind of how I spent that day. I don't really think I was planning anything or considering how long I might be there. It was simply that I need to do everything I can right now, right here, to survive the elements, Claire said. She took an inventory of her supplies. She had 3 liters of water left and a few snacks. A small first aid kit with a couple of Tylenol and a digital camera. She was lying there alone, wondering if anyone would find her. She decided to record a message on the camera. As she recorded the message, Claire felt a little embarrassed. She was alone with a broken pelvis miles from a trail without cell service, but still. She felt like she was being overly dramatic, at least until the sun started to set, when I realized I was going to be spending the night out there. That was so terrifying to me. The idea that I'd injured myself on a hike in the daytime was one thing. That's an accident. The fact that I was now going to be out there at night, and the night is a long time, that was when, like, oh, this is really serious. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified, because now there wasn't anything to hold on to. No one was going to come out at night, like there was no one was going to come by. I had nothing to do except to just survive the night, she said. Claire's mind grappled with the fear of encountering rattlesnakes, even though she knew they weren't nocturnal, but it was rattlesnake season. Being at ground level and unable to move heightened her vulnerability, leading her to anticipate nocturnal wildlife encounters. Every slight noise or disturbance in the surroundings made her body tense up. Adding to her discomfort was the cold, as the temperature had dropped significantly since the day before. As Claire lay there, she contemplated that if she could endure until morning, someone would likely find her. This newfound hope accompanied the arrival of daylight, which had a profound impact on her state of mind. She recorded another message, documenting her makeshift shelter and the changing conditions as the sun rose. However, Claire's phone eventually died, leaving her unable to track time or communicate. She clung to a faint hope that somehow her phone's tracking function might be activated despite her lack of a signal. Claire's isolation weighed heavily on her. She found solace in using her camera to leave messages for herself, providing a sense of connection and comfort in her dire circumstances. This act helped her feel seen and heard, even in her isolation.
In this crazy heat, I keep thinking I'm hearing a helicopter. At one point I thought I heard an ambulance in the distance, but it was all in my head. It's not fair.
After 24 hours of enduring these challenges, Claire began to feel the physical effects of dehydration, including a parched mouth, sore throat, and kidney discomfort. She had been collecting her urine in a bottle to avoid urinating in her pants, as she wanted to minimize any attraction to animals and additional discomfort. As her water supply dwindled, Claire contemplated drinking the collected urine for survival. She eventually made the pragmatic decision to try it, recognizing the direness of her situation. Throughout this ordeal, her focus remained mainly on survival, though there were moments when her mind would wander to more emotional thoughts. She found herself contemplating regrets and, notably, the time she had spent on social media. Claire realized that her excessive social media use had been a way to mask her true self and avoid vulnerability. This introspection was a significant part of her mental journey during the ordeal. That's a tough thing to be reflecting on as you are there alone. And the irony of it is that lying out there and reflecting on it, it's also the realization that by not forming stronger connections and stronger lines of communication with the people in my life is part of the reason I was in that situation in the first place. On the afternoon of the second day, Claire decided she needed to try to rescue herself using her walking stick as a lever under her body. She tried to roll over. Claire Nelson contemplated the idea of rolling over onto her front and attempting to drag herself. However, even the thought of moving her body even an inch sent blinding waves of pain through her. She realized the impossibility of this physical feat and understood that she couldn't risk losing consciousness in the scorching heat, uncertain if she would awaken if she did. She only attempted this once, struggling with the overwhelming heat. As the second day progressed and the sun began to set, Claire's hopes for rescue dwindled. She found herself facing moments of doubt, wondering if she would endure another night. These thoughts weighed heavily on her, with questions about whether anyone was even looking for her, or if she would be left to perish in isolation. When she woke up on the third day, Claire felt increasingly alone, but held on to a glimmer of optimism. hoping that this would be the day she was rescued. The approaching weekend brought a renewed sense of hope as she believed that more people visiting the park would increase her chances of being found. However, the relentless heat began to play tricks on her mind, causing her to imagine hearing helicopters and ambulances in the distance, just mere hallucinations. On that third day, Claire shed her first tears, a sign that her hope was waning. Despite these low points, she never completely lost her survival instinct. Even in her darkest moments, she would rally herself, determined to endure and survive. Claire's journey through these mental and emotional challenges was marked by a continuous internal battle to hold onto her will, to survive between moments of despair and determination. Claire Nelson found it difficult to fend off thoughts of hopelessness as the days passed. She had received no indication that anyone was actively searching for her, leaving her feeling isolated and abandoned. However, on the morning of her third day in the wilderness, she found a glimmer of hope as she realized that the approaching weekend might bring more visitors to the park, increasing her chances of being found. She clung to any opportunity for hope, using it as a lifeline to keep herself going. Despite her determination to stay positive, the scorching heat began to play tricks on Claire's mind. She imagined hearing helicopters and ambulances, even though they were mere hallucinations induced by the extreme conditions. Although there were moments when she felt on the brink of surrender, she always managed to rally herself, determined to endure and survive. Her journey through these emotional fluctuations resembled a zigzag pattern as she grappled with despair and unwavering determination. Eventually, on the fourth morning, Claire's perspective began to shift. She woke up feeling weaker than ever, both physically and mentally, and began contemplating the possibility of not making it out alive. She acknowledged the stunning beauty of the place where she might meet her end, a serene acceptance beginning to settle in. With her reserves depleted and her mind drifting, Claire lay in the heat, drifting in and out of consciousness. Suddenly, she heard the distinct sound of a helicopter flying low and voices. At first, she dismissed it as another hallucination, but as the helicopter circled and the voices grew louder, she realized it was real. I heard the helicopter again, and this time I'm like, there really is a helicopter. And I heard this voice come again over the loudspeaker, and they said they were looking for a missing hiker. And at that point, I didn't know whether that was me that they were looking for or another hiker. Anything was possible. But the fact that there was a search helicopter out there was like, this is my chance. This is the only chance I've got. I don't have much fight left in me, but they've got to see me, she recalled. The rescue helicopter was searching for her, and her adrenaline surged. She waved her sunshade and screamed, desperately trying to get their attention. However, the helicopter was initially too far away to see her clearly, leaving Claire anxious and disheartened. It circled once more, and this time they called her name and asked her to make herself known. I just need them to come back, and I need them to come over here. Like, if they're looking for me, then clearly they're looking for me on the trail, and I'm not on the trail. I decided I would reinforce the sunshade and make it as big as I could. I put my t-shirt and hat on it. I thought, if they come back, I just need them to see this thing. And then they did come back, and I stretched my arms up. I was full of adrenaline at this point. I'd gone from being completely, on my lowest ebb that I've ever been in my life to this surge of adrenaline. And I'm stretching my arms up, and my body is aching in just agony, but I'm waving the sunshade and screaming like, I'm here, I'm here. And I still can't see the helicopter. But then I hear them say, we see you. We're going to come and get you. I will never forget those words. I will never in my life forget those words. And I dropped my sunshade, my arms fell to my sides, and I just thought, I don't have to fight anymore, and I'm going to live. Claire's adrenaline-fueled efforts finally paid off as they spotted her makeshift signal and assured her they would rescue her. It took time for the rescue team to reach Claire's remote location and even more time to figure out how to extricate her. Eventually, they carried her to a clearing where a helicopter could safely lift her to safety and transport her to a hospital in Palm Springs. In the hospital, Claire was given the medical attention she desperately needed, including morphine for pain and fluids for dehydration. She also received a phone call from her family, who had been desperately searching for her. It was a moment of shock and relief to learn that she was not as alone as she had believed. Claire's journey to recovery was slow, marked by major surgery to repair her broken pelvis and months spent in a wheelchair. Emotionally, She faced a period of introspection and recovery, leaving London in order to find out who she was away from other people and lying broken on the desert floor. She'd undoubtedly come face to face with her raw self. I definitely don't recommend it as a method of finding yourself, but certainly what happened ended up fast-tracking that journey that I was on, and it was obviously in the most intense and painful way possible. But I came back to London at the end of the 2 years thinking, well, yeah, this is the wake-up call that I went looking for. And I think I'm always probably going to be figuring out who I am in some way. But the big difference now is learning to accept the things that I learn about myself, whether I like them or not, she said. A couple of years after the ordeal, Miss Nelson wrote a memoir, Things I Learned from Falling, about the near-death experience and how it reshaped her life. Claire was very fortunate, as Joshua Tree is notorious for missing people, deaths, and adventurers getting lost. Many do not make it out alive. In recent years, fatalities and injuries have become all too common in Joshua Tree, where an increase in visitation numbers has dangerously coincided with limited search and rescue resources. A year before Nelson's ordeal, Joseph Orbeso and Rachel Wen were last seen entering Joshua Tree National Park early on July 27, 2017, and were reported missing the next day by the owner of the Airbnb where they had stayed. After weeks of searching, the nearby Sheriff's Dispatch Center received a call from a Joshua Tree ranger reporting the remains of 2 deceased people locked in an embrace had been located inside the park. Authorities found the couple died of gunshot wounds. Many believe the murder-suicide resulted from desperation, not anger, and the shooting happened only after the couple became lost in the sprawling park and ran out of food and water. Their car was only 2 miles away. Facing mortality had shifted Claire Nelson's perspective, reminding her that the judgment she ultimately had to live with was her own. She vowed not to let her life be determined by the fears of imposter syndrome, fear of being disliked, or fear of being misunderstood. Miss Nelson expresses, "You only get this one life, and it's such a waste to let it be determined by what other people think." My life was driven by fear of being disliked, fear of being misunderstood, and all of those things. And while fears are natural and valid, they don't have to control how you spend your life. In the heart of the desert, one encounters the raw power of nature. Its unrelenting heat, biting cold, and vast desolation remind us of the untamed forces in the world. It pushes us to our limits, questioning our will to survive, and in doing so, it reveals the depths of our strength and character. Just as the desert demands careful planning and preparation, life's challenges often require us to prepare for the unexpected. These harsh environments teach us to be vigilant and equipped. Every rustle in the sand and every howling wind can be unsettling, but confronting fear is where true courage emerges. The desert compels us to confront our anxieties and emerge stronger for it. Survival in the desert often hinges on relying on our inner resources to overcome adversity. The desert is an unforgiving teacher. It emphasizes the importance of measured steps and the wisdom of caution. In life, calculated risks and prudent choices can help us navigate dangerous terrains. So, while the desert presents dangers, it also offers profound lessons and a chance to emerge wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the world around us. It reminds us to approach life's challenges with caution, respect, and the indomitable spirit to conquer the seemingly insurmountable. Heed these words so you can get through an outdoor disaster. Thank you for watching. Want more outdoor disaster content? Check out these stories I believe you'll enjoy.